Good evening, I'm DK Rossner. Welcome back to the TTT News. Founder and Director of Support Autism T&T Dr. Radica Mahase joins us to speak about some awards that are on the cards. But we are wading through a great deal before we get to those awards. We thank her for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Mahase. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. How are you doing?
We're all right, thank you. But we know that April 2 is a day for observing autism. But even before that, though, can you give us an overview of Support Autism T&T, please?
Okay, so Support Autism T&T was started 6 years ago. I have a nephew who has autism, and in the whole trial process of trying to get him diagnosed and trying to get him into school and, trying to get him the therapy that he needed, I realized how difficult it was for parents and caregivers. And I realized how little opportunities we have in Trinidad and Tobago for persons who have been diagnosed with autism or who are on the spectrum. So I started Support Autism T&T 6 years ago with the main idea that it will be there to create opportunities for individuals with autism on the spectrum, as well as to advocate for acceptance and inclusion and create a sense of awareness as well. So our main mandate is to create opportunities, and every year we would normally have events and activities throughout the year for individuals with autism, where they would come and we would have our volunteers doing activities with them that are sensory friendly and so on. Unfortunately, we had to put a stop to that until it is safe again for our kids to come out. But we have continued with some virtual events and activities that our volunteers have been engaged in.
And just before we get to those virtual events, you raised some points: volunteerism, resources or lack thereof. You also spoke about diagnosing. Now, in terms of diagnosis, is it a matter of there being a flat diagnosis, so okay, well, your arm is broken? Or is it, you also spoke about a spectrum. Explain the spectrum to me, please, because I think sometimes people think that, okay, it's one flat thing and everyone who has autism or is dealing with autism has the same challenges or situations. So what's that spectrum about?
Okay, so autism is a developmental issue, and it is based on a spectrum. It's actually called autism spectrum disorder, which means that no two individuals will have the exact same signs or the same characteristics of autism. We always say that everybody is unique. In this case, everybody is truly unique. Autism is normally characterized by three main things. Issues with verbal communication, issues with social interaction, and repetitive behavior. So when we look at the spectrum, we would see that if two individuals are diagnosed, they might have different levels of issues with any of these three. So for example, a child with autism might be very able to communicate verbally, whereas another child, as in the case of my nephew, would not communicate verbally. So it all depends on the individuals and the way in which they display issues with those three characteristics that I just mentioned. So every single individual is truly unique. And many times you will hear persons referring to children who are high functioning or children who are low functioning. Those who are high functioning on the autism spectrum, they might be able to communicate effectively. They might be able to interact socially, but they will have other issues that they're dealing with, such as sensory issues and so on. On the other hand, those who are on the lower end of the spectrum might not be able to do any of those things on their own, and they might be dealing with those issues in a much more, deeper manner.
And what are some of the things that you, as a layperson, might look for? Because yes, we may have parents who are new and they say, okay, well, I hear other people talking about the children doing this at this age, or you're looking and seeing, okay, well, these are some of the things that they say are general, or even just coming into contact with someone. What are some of the things that you look for to say, okay, well, I think that this person may have autism, so I may have to treat with them a little differently, change my approach?
So a child with autism can be diagnosed as early as 9 months, 1 year. And basically, there are milestones that every child is supposed to meet. What we refer to as a neurological child will be able to meet at different stages in their life. So from 0 to 6 months, there are certain things we look at. From 6 to 12 months, there are certain things, certain milestones that we expect them to be able to achieve. And the earliest sign is when we see children not achieving those milestones. So, for example, the one that parents normally pick up on very quickly is the speech. We know that when a child reaches 12 months, they will start to say, may at least make songs and say simple words like mama, things like that. By 2 years, for sure, we know that they will start saying one word or two word sentences. So we look at those milestones and we look to see how they interact. So generally, when we're looking at individuals with autism, we can pick up on speech, whether or not they are speaking at the level that they're supposed to, given their chronological age, whether or not their speech is developing, whether a child at a year is saying words, a child at 2 years is saying two sentences, two-word sentences, by 3 years if they're communicating verbally. So that's one. The second one is social interaction. So again, many parents and caregivers would pick up on the fact that their babies are not making eye contact. When you call them by their names, they're not looking at you, they're not responding. If, for example, a toddler or a preschooler is placed in a setting with other preschoolers and they're not interacting with them, they're fascinated on one specific things like playing with a toy over and over, the repetitive movements such as making the same movements, rocking back and forward all the time, flapping their hands, things like that. Now, given all that, as I started off by saying, it's a spectrum. So some children don't even display those. We have had many cases where children develop as a normal, met all the milestones, but then when they reach about 2 or 3 years, they suddenly stop speaking, or other things, other factors come into play. So you really and truly need to look at the holistic development of the child, and you will look for certain signs in terms of the milestones that are being met, and you will be able to tell that my child is not interacting, my child is not speaking, my child is doing certain movements over and over. Those are the normal ones that we look for, but it is really much more complicated like that, because when a child is diagnosed, a pediatrician who specializes in child development will look at everything, would look at from the time the mother was pregnant with the child to every step, every milestone that child has achieved. So it is, I'm just giving you a very simplistic view, but it is much more complicated.
Thank you for giving me that view, Dr. Mahase. And we continue because I have a lot more questions when we return on the other side of this conversation. Stay with us. We are speaking with Dr. Radica Mahase about autism and Support Autism T&T. Welcome back. We are speaking with Dr. Radica Mahase about autism and Support Autism T&T. And Dr. Mahase, I'm wondering though, what are some of the feedback that you've been getting from people, families, with individuals who have autism during this time? Because to my understanding, one of the things that helps is developing a routine, having a set of things or parameters that you can count on. Okay, well, they're going to be there in this fashion. With the change during the pandemic, what kind of feedback are you getting with regard to something like that?
So there are two different things that we're talking about. One, we have a set of children with autism and adults, because these children grow up to be adults, in our country who have never attended any kind of educational institution, because our public education system doesn't really cater to their needs. So many of them who are on the lower end of the spectrum, they cannot survive in a regular school. So they have been home. So when all these COVID restrictions set in, nothing really changed in their routine or in their lifestyle because they were accustomed to being home and they had their routine that they were accustomed to, where, you know, parents and caregivers are trying to homeschool them, trying to teach them at whatever level they are at. Then we have those who were and, you know, engaged in some kind of educational activities, who were enrolled in formal schools. And when schools closed, it was very difficult for them to make that adjustment because one, it disrupts the entire routine. You know, the routine of getting up in the morning and getting dressed and going to school and having somebody working there with you, whether on a one-on-one basis or what, you know, whatever way. And then it also became very difficult for a lot of them to transition to online because we have to understand that our education system is really geared towards a standardized method of teaching. And most of the children with autism, many of them, they need to be taught in a different manner. When they were in a school, you know, the teachers would still make that extra effort to teach them in a way that they would learn. But once we transitioned to online, it became difficult for them to sit for long periods in front of a device to be able to follow with the work. So we have had many parents who said that, you know, their child just couldn't keep up and they had to stop. It was becoming very frustrated for them. You know, they were getting tired. They were starting to get headaches from looking at the screen and things like that. So it has been very difficult for those who are accustomed to being out of the house to now cope with that disruption in their daily routine. And also with therapy, you know, whether many of the parents try to accept therapy. Therapy is only available privately. They try to access therapy for their children, and they run into problems once COVID restrictions started because you couldn't go, you couldn't take your child to those therapy. And we have seen so many situations where the children have actually regressed in development. And that is really sad because it shows us more than ever how much an individual with autism needs to have that access to education and that continuous access to therapy so that they will continue developing intellectually and mentally.
And that makes me want to bring up the issue of attitudes towards autism. We may not need to go as wide as saying, okay, well, individuals with special needs generally. But what was your take on attitudes towards autism? It may be on a personal level, on a policy level. The floor is yours.
So when it comes to attitude, I've been saying this for a few years. Trinidad and Tobago is not an inclusive society. Whether it's inclusive to those with autism as well as other special needs, we are generally not very inclusive. We have had too many incidents where parents said to us, well, you know, I was traveling in a maxi with my child and my child was having a rough time. They had a meltdown and everybody in the maxi started to say, why you don't discipline your child? Hit her 2 slaps, she will be better. You know, things like that. And I mean, we also have so many cases where parents just stop taking their children out in public because they were always there open to all the scares and open to all the comments that other people would say to them. So on one level, at a societal level, we do not have that kind of acceptance, and that have had serious repercussions for persons with autism and other disabilities because it reached a point in many cases where these children, their parents stop taking them out in public because of all the, you know, the things that they have to face with, the discrimination that they have to face with, and they grow up literally at home. You know, I refer to them as an invisible part of our population. So on one level, we have that. Then on the other level, we have generally at the national level, at the level of government, we need to implement our policies. We don't have a lack of policies. We have a policy on inclusive education. We have a policy on children. We have so many policies that there, but they're all on paper. And unless those policies are actually implemented, the situation will continue where we are not providing for persons with autism and other disabilities at a national level. So we have a long way to go with that. And We just need the government and society in the whole to realize that these children and adults with disabilities, with autism, with whatever kind of special needs, they are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and they have a right to access equal opportunities as every other citizen. And we need to put things in place and implement policies to cater to them and their development. Otherwise, they will not grow up to be viable members of our society. They have the potential to develop and to be able to contribute to society, but we have to give them the tools that they need for development.
And what are some of those tools that you've, in your experience, the 6 years of support autism T&T, that have worked in terms of making some of these individuals a little more viable, a little more able to interact and engage with society, and even with regard to how they treat themselves?
Oh, definitely educational opportunities. We have too many children with autism who are not enrolled in schools, whether if they can't afford to go to the private schools because parents cannot pay those high costs, and they cannot get into public schools because the schools, we have so many cases where schools turn down the children and they tell the parents, I'm sorry, we don't have teachers who specialize in special needs education, or we don't have the facilities for your child. And, we have too many of them who are not attending school and getting an education, a formal education. And the second one is therapy. Children with autism, adults as well, they need a range of therapy depending on their level of development. So it ranges from speech therapy, behavioral therapy, development therapy, occupational therapy. None of those are actually available in the public healthcare system. And the cost ranges from $250 to $500 an hour. Now, the standard requirement for therapy, or the required amount, is 15 hours a week. We have parents who cannot even afford to take their child for 1 hour of therapy, much less 15 hours of therapy, when you have to pay those kind of exorbitant fees because it is only available privately. So that would be the two that we need to focus on immediately. Providing therapy, making therapy and educational opportunities equally accessible to all children. Children from lower income brackets whose parents are dependent on disability grant to take care of them, they cannot afford private therapy and they cannot afford private schools. So we need to address that.
Now, we have about a minute and a half to go, Dr. Mahase. And we started off saying we're going to get to the awards, so I'm not going to let us finish without talking about them. What are these awards about? How do people engage you for them? And just give us all the information about them. Thank you.
So you started off by saying that April 2nd is World Autism Awareness Day. April is normally celebrated as World Autism Awareness Month. April 2nd is a day that was designated by the United Nations General Assembly. And we at Support Autism T&T decided that this year, given the fact that we are not allowed to have our physical events because it's just not safe to have our kids out, we wanted to still come up with something that would recognize them and recognize their support system. So we came up with something called the Autism Superhero Awards, which we launched on the 23rd of February. And this award recognizes individuals with autism who have excelled despite the challenges that they face, as well as all those persons who contribute towards their positive development. There are 5 categories, and it's open to nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. The first category is personal achievement. That is for any individual with autism who have excelled despite challenges. The second one is for outstanding sibling. The third one is a dedicated youth volunteer award. The fourth is a superhero parent or caregiver award. And the fifth is a committed educator award. So we want to honor all those persons who play a very positive role in supporting persons with autism. And we want to show that persons with autism deserve to be included. This is the first award of its kind in Trinidad and Tobago. Eventually, we would like to extend it to not just persons with autism, but persons with all special needs, because we believe that this is one of the best way of showing our support for them and celebrating them and recognizing that they are also an important part of our society.
And
We are
definitely this is
invited.
something that we'd want to speak with you a little after the 2nd of April when the awards are given out to see who got them and what it is they did. But we want to thank you so much, Dr. Mahase, for giving us that time, a little insight into it. On behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Ronstadt. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.